Okay, Tabitha,
Take it away.
take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces too this evening. We'll start off with some introductions here. So first off, my name is Tabitha Panis. I am a farm bill biologist with Pheasants Forever, and I work in Crawford, Carroll, Sac, and Ida counties. And I've been with Pheasants Forever for about a year and a half now, working with private landowners on different habitat projects, and I really enjoy it. I'm originally from Omaha. I have a degree in environmental science from the University of Omaha. In the past, I've worked for the Conservation Corps of Iowa, doing a lot of sort of more boots on the ground work instead of the planning work that we do now. And I've interned with Fontenelle Forest, where I got my very first experience with prescribed fire. So I like to go back there and see some of the things they're doing nowadays. But I'll let Jason Anderson introduce himself as well here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Anderson. I'm a compatriot of Tabitha. I'm also a farm bill wildlife biologist. I cover Potawatomi, Harrison, and Shelby counties, so right to the southwest of where Tabitha's at. I started with Pheasants Forever in 2015. Yeah, it seems like a long time ago now. But either way, I started in prescribed fire, being engaged in prescribed fire in 2010 as part of my undergraduate work, doing work with prairies. And then I'm also a chief officer on our local fire department. So I have some fire experience from kind of both sides of the coin there.
Thank you, Jason.
I do want to say thanks everybody for coming out tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. We already covered the part where Jason talked about how this meeting will be recorded for this evening. A couple other housekeeping things. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat below. There is a button that has a little bubble. It looks like a chat. So if you have a question, you can type it into there. Otherwise, you can just keep it in your mind for the end, and we will be sure to save questions for you at the end. And so this presentation will be about an hour, and we'll go ahead and get started here. So thank you for joining us this evening as Jason and I will be discussing grassland prescribed fire. So if you'll advance to the next slide here.
I'm running the technology, so bear with me.
You'll do great. So we have a little outline here this evening on what we're going to discuss with you. The first topic I'm going to discuss is why would you burn? Why prescribed fire? We'll then get into some management goals that prescribed fire is good for. Jason is going to be discussing the planning of the burn, talking about considering smoke, the prescription, which is going to detail what conditions you're going to want to burn under, like weather conditions, wind directions. He's going to discuss different types of fire breaks and how you can go about addressing fire breaks on your burn. And then I am going to discuss the day of the burn, who you're going to need to notify, the ignition plan, and the post-burn evaluation. I would like to say that we do only have an hour this evening, so we are not going to be getting into super in-depth on all of these. You can always ask us questions if you don't have time this evening or think of them later. You can always ask us questions later on. Reach out to us when something comes up when you're driving in your car and a question pops into your head. That's usually how it happens for me. So feel free to reach us later, or reach us if you'd like more information on any of these topics, because it is going to be an overview. So moving on to the next slide. Thank you. What is prescribed burning? We have a definition of prescribed burning here. They are controlled fires that are purposefully set under a specific set of conditions in order to meet management objectives. So these fires are not, you decide to do it day of. We're waiting and looking at the weather for a specific set of conditions under which we want to burn under. And we're doing it for a reason. And a lot of times people might think that reason is to just simply meet requirements of a program that they're enrolled in, possibly the Conservation Reserve Program, but that's really not a great reason to do a prescribed fire just to meet requirements. We're gonna wanna do a little more thought and planning and figure out some real goals as to why we're putting fire on the landscape. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about those in the upcoming slides here. So advancing on to the next slide. A little bit about the history of prescribed fire in Iowa here. So this is a great painting. Jason was the one who provided this image for the slide. Historically, fires roamed across the state of Iowa, and they are what have created Iowa's tall grass prairie system. So these fires would move across the state of Iowa naturally. They would be started possibly by lightning strikes, but oftentimes they would also be started by Native Americans. Native Americans used these fires for a number of reasons. They used them in warfare as a warfare tactic. So if you have, maybe an enemy tribe, it is a really good warfare tactic to try to set a fire onto them. Sounds horrible, but in opposition, they would also set fires to protect themselves. So I don't know if you all have ever heard of maybe firefighters out west in a last ditch situation. You'll light a fire around yourself to try to remove the fuel around them. And so Native Americans would preemptively light fires around their areas so that it was all black and burned and they couldn't be burned, as the fires moved in. So they also used it as some of the first grazing management or pasture management, in Iowa and the Midwest. So when you light a fire and those native grasses come back up super green and lush after that, that attracted a lot of bison that would then roam into these areas, and Native Americans were able to hunt them. So it was also a hunting tactic. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that fire is a natural part of the landscape. It's been occurring for a lot longer than settlers ever arrived in Iowa. And it's actually really interesting to read testimonials or things from the first settlers in Iowa. Sometimes they talk about sleeping with one eye open until the first snowfall of every year because these fires would roam across almost annually sometimes. And yeah, so it was, the first settlers were also very surprised to find the landscape so devoid of trees. There are letters from settlers back to families in the East where they talk about, I think, I'm gonna go crazy if I don't see any trees because there was just so much grassland and that grassland is managed by fire. So point of this is just to show you how fire has been around for a long time and it's a natural part of the ecosystems in the Midwest. So moving on to the next slide here.
Maybe. There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So on this slide, I wanted to talk about why would you burn? So there's a number of reasons that you can burn. Burning maintains grassland ecosystems. It reduces pathogens in the soil. It causes our natives to be really invigorated and grow back lusciously. And it can also scarify seeds of certain native plants that actually need fire to propagate their seeds. Fire can also remove woody vegetation, trees and shrubs that might move into our grassland areas. And so it is just one tool in a land manager's toolbox that can have some really great benefits. And grasses, that's fine to be on this slide. Grasses, their growing points are actually underground, whereas trees and shrubs growing points are like on their buds and terminal ends above ground. So grasses have most of their energy and their root system underground, so they're not as affected by fire as woody vegetation is. So we see a picture here of a fire moving into some timber. We see some oaks. It looks oak savanna-esque in this picture. And so with this slide, I was going to read to you from an Iowa DNR publication called The History of Trees, which I find really interesting. So it says that only about 18% of Iowa had some sort of tree cover in the 1850s. The rest lay coated by thick roots of prairie grasses that loved both the sun's scorching heat and the fires that rolled like a locomotive across the grasslands, thwarting any errant attempts at tree invasion. These fires in place crept into woodlands, thinning them and creating savannas, flower-dappled grasslands spotted by broad-crowned fir or white oaks. Savannas bordered denser woodlands and straddled ridges. So that just goes to show how timber and woodlands used to be not so common in Iowa. They were more commonly, most of the areas were prairie and grasslands that were maintained by prescribed fire. So that's one reason of why you might want to burn. So advancing on to the next slide here. Thank you, Jason. So I just discussed a little bit about why burn. Now I'm going to discuss some management goals. So it's important to come up with clear management goals for the land and what you might want a fire to do. And here I have some of those listed. So first you're going to want to survey your landscape and see what you have out there and you know how fire might help your landscape before you burn. So you're going to want to go out and identify maybe different plant species, different animal species, maybe identify problems you have. You could have invasive species, and then figure out your goals to, and then your goals are going to be what determines your actions. So different goals you might have is to maintain the diversity of a seeding, so it doesn't become possibly grass dominated or dominated with invasives. You're going to want to maintain a nice diversity out there, as you can see in the picture on the right. You might want to eliminate thick grass thatch, manage noxious weeds, control woody vegetation, or vary structural diversity and promote early successional habitat. So Jason just did a presentation earlier this afternoon talking about different management types, and he talked about early successional habitat. And the very basic view of that is that over time, grasslands will turn to trees without any management. So, you know, you can see that as you drive out on the landscape in Iowa. If you see a pasture, you see little cedars popping up, you know, and if those cedars aren't managed, eventually you see something that looks like half of a pasture with a lot of trees and shrubs and kind of gnarlier vegetation. So over time, without, you know, as we don't no longer have raging prairie fires or munching bison, we're going to get areas that are a lot more dominated by woody species versus grass and wildflowers. So these could be some of your management goals. Moving on to the next slide. This is a really good visual example of diversity. So on the left here, we see tall, big blue stem. We see some purple flowers, some yellow flowers, different native species. And on the right, we have what is more grass dominated with trees and shrubs encroaching in the background. So this could be a goal, you know, maybe you want to aim for the more diverse on the left and get away from those grass dominated species on the right. So here's a picture of cedar trees encroaching on what looks like remnant prairie, and nothing is growing under there. So cedar trees and a lot of other trees provide a lot of shade, and native grasses and wildflowers really need shade. So it looks like there's a prescribed fire going on in the background right in this picture, and that fire can hopefully push out a lot of those smaller cedars and kill those that are smaller, but those larger ones might need more mechanical removal. But just showing that nothing is growing under there, it's not a very diverse system when cedars take over. So on to the next slide here. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Jason, and he's going to talk about planning the burn.
All right. So I'm going to mute you, Tabitha. I can hear myself, and it's going to be very distracting. Okay. So when we're planning these burns, we have an ecological goal in mind, and that is super important because every fire needs to accomplish something. There's got to be some ecological objective that we are trying to accomplish. And like Tabitha said, meeting program requirements is not a valid, although I know that people will try to get that goal across, it is not a valid goal to have. It needs to, have a goal, and we plan the fire according to the goal. And so there's basically a 3-step process that I have for planning a fire, and it all evolves around safety. Okay. Safety, as they say, is paramount. It is the most important part of planning a fire. So we're going to keep safety and ecological goals in mind when we're walking through this. So that when you have a plan, whatever structure that takes, this sheet that's in front of you is the guide sheet that we use as far as the Natural Resource Conservation Service branch of the USDA. We have this prescribed burning job sheet, which is basically an instructional sheet on how to make a burn plan. You can take this as a landowner or a conservation practitioner and fill this out, and it'll give you a good idea of all the steps that you need to take to fill out a burn plan. So you can use a sheet like this. You can also go to Iowa State has a really good set of resources that are available at this jumbled web address right here. But they have a bunch of really good guidebooks on how to do burn planning and all the different considerations that you should ideally take a look at. Like Tabitha said, we unfortunately just do not have time to delve into the level of detail that this topic requires. But we're going to do a very 30,000 foot view, we'll say. So going back to the 3-step process, really, it is about considering smoke. I'm just going to stick on to the next one. The first step, considering smoke. So where do you not want your smoke to go? Is there a little lady down the road that has asthma or COPD, something like that, and you don't want to put smoke on her house? Is there a confinement or a school or a town nearby, a major road, anything like that? Is there anything that you cannot put smoke on? Speaking of roads, I have this picture. So it is actually in Iowa, it is a form of trespassing to put smoke across a roadway, and people will drive through this. So you have to really consider, this is a paved highway, and if someone was driving through there the same time you were driving through there, there's a good chance of an accident, and you don't want that. So you don't want to impinge roadways. Yeah, smoke sensitive areas, just in general. Identify any smoke sensitive areas that you have adjacent or adjacent or close by your burn unit. And that is going to kind of steer the next 2 steps. All right, so consider your smoke, where it's going to go and where you don't want it to go, and that is going to drive your prescription. As the next step is figuring out the prescription. When we talk about a prescription for a fire, we're actually just talking about the weather conditions that we want. And the whole idea of a prescription is to stack the deck in your favor, right? So the nice thing about doing a prescribed fire is that you can pick the time and the day that it's happening and the weather conditions, right? So if we have our ecological goals in mind, then that is going to tell us something about what we want as far as as far as how we want our fire to behave, I guess. And honestly, we could talk for probably an hour about different prescriptions for different functions, and maybe if we have time at the end, we can kind of delve a little bit more into that. But really, you cannot go wrong by following these basic conditions right here. So somewhere air temperature between 40 to 70 degrees, relative humidity 30 to 60%. You can read it. but you're picking a window of weather that you are going to utilize, and you don't want anything, you don't want extremes on any of them necessarily, or if you do have an extreme, then you want to temper your weather the other direction. So for example, if your prescription is that 40 to 70 degree weather window and your humidity is 30 to 60%, well, you probably should be set up a red flag, no pun intended. If you have a 70-degree day and your relative humidity is going to be 30, well, that is going to have, yes, technically that is inside your prescription, but that is going to have more active fire than it would be if it was 50% humidity in a 70-degree day, for example. And again, we could really get nerdy on that. And there's all kinds of classes that you can take on just planning for weather. But if you stay inside these parameters that are right here, these the example acceptable conditions, you'll probably be okay. And one thing that I want to point out is the wind speed. You'll notice that there is a minimum wind speed of 5 to 15 miles an hour. And some people will come to me and they'll say, well, we don't have any wind today. It's a perfect day to burn, And actually, that is dead wrong. You want some amount of wind for your fire, because you want to be able to count on that wind to push it and know what direction the wind is going to go. The worst conditions to burn in are light and variable winds, where the wind is switching around. Either there's no wind and then there can be a wind, it could go up, 3 to 5 miles an hour from the south, and then it dies down, and then it goes from the west, or it just kind of dances around. And that is a very dangerous situation, because that's how the fire can get away from you. So again, the takeaway for the prescription is just to stack the deck in your favor, because you can pick the conditions that you're going to have the most chances of being successful. Let me make sure I hit all the points I wanted to. I did. All right. So you've identified your smoke sensitive areas. You have written a prescription that can keep the smoke away from those areas. I guess I didn't really talk about that. I probably should have. Let's say, for example, let's go back. No, wait, no. Function P. Okay. Let's say that you are burning this piece that's on the right there. Okay. And then you know that you have a paved road that's we'll say it's on the west side, the left west side. So you very well may consider that you should have a wind direction you're only going to burn under a wind where the wind is coming from the west. So it's going to blow the smoke. Instead of this is an east wind, because it's coming and it's blowing the smoke across the road. Instead, you would want the opposite, where it's coming from the west and blowing the smoke towards the east, thus keeping the smoke off of the roadway. And so that's the tie-in between the smoke sensitive areas and your prescription, because you can pick the days of different winds, therefore giving you your favorable conditions. Whew! Lots of stuff, trying to keep it all separate in my head. All right, so once you have your prescription, then you can plan your fire breaks. And I would say for a burn plan, where the fire breaks go and what types they are is 90% of the plan. Honestly, as someone who has written a ton of these things, it is the most important part of the burn plan is where the fire breaks go. There's all kinds of different fire breaks. This is an example job sheet that kind of accompanies that prescribed burning job sheet from the NRCS. This basically gives the USDA's recommendation for fire break construction. We're going to roll through a few different examples. I got some good pictures of them, but not all fire breaks are created equal, certainly, but you should do it. The thing that I tell people the most, landowners we're talking about, or producers, whatever you want to say, is that the hard work comes in the preparation for the fire. And that means doing the planning and maintaining and mowing and preparing the fire breaks. The burn should be the easy day, unless you did something wrong and the fire gets away. That's not particularly fun, but all the work should come. The more work you do is in preparation, the smoother it's going to go on the day of the fire. Absolutely. And also, just one thing, just think about contingency fire breaks as well. I mean, there's one thing to say, you know, you have this, you got this nice green fire break right around up next to the edge. Well, that's fine. But think of a contingency for if the fire crosses that fire break, do you need to mow in or prepare some contingency fire breaks around potentially like a home place or your neighbor's barn or something like that. It's something to think about, certainly when you're doing your burn planning and placing your fire breaks. So different types of fire breaks. These are the easiest ones to use. So if you can use a road or a creek or lake or something that will absolutely not burn as a fire break, that is by far the best thing to do. Like the dirt road is not going to burn. And if you're, especially like in this situation, the smoke is coming from the right side and it's going and it's blowing across to the left. So it's a backing fire that's trying to cross that road. I mean, that is bomb proof. Absolutely. And then in the lower right, if they're burning up against a lake, there's just literally no place for that fire to go. Even like if it was throwing all kinds of ash and all kinds of things, that is very desirable. So sometimes if you have a choice between maybe burning a little bit of extra area so that you can get to a road or a pond or a lake or something like that, maybe burning on your neighbor's ground or some extra acres that aren't under a program contract or whatever, that can be very advantageous, and it makes things so much easier rather than following property lines or anything necessarily. If you don't have a natural fire break that's unburnable, the next best thing is a green fire break. So this would be something that you probably did if you were doing a reconstruction. So if you're enrolled in a program like Conservation Reserve Program and you did a seeding as part of that, you may have put a green fire break in. It's a separate seeding that would have been probably installed around the edges of your CRP seeding. And you can see that this is very different. So this is the native seeding on the left and right of the fire break. And then this is predominantly introduced legumes that greens up early and is not, in general, very receptive to fire. And this is very easy to control a fire on. It will burn to a certain extent because what you can't see in this picture is the little small layer of litter that is underneath that green canopy. But for the most part, you're going to have a very easy time holding a fire on a green fire break such as this. Stepping back, as far as going in order of poor fire breaks, probably the least advantageous type of fire break is mowed fire break. Okay, so yes, in this case they've mowed a strip, probably took maybe a 6-foot, 4-foot mower through there. Maybe it's a lawn mower, I don't know actually, but this picture is from Kansas, so they do all kinds of things weird down there. You can tell by the fence post. But so they mowed right through there, and you're lowering the level of the grass, the fuel is what we would call it. But there's still fuel there. There's contiguous fuel across the whole line, essentially. Yes, it's easier to control the fire on a mowed fire break, but it'll burn straight through there. And so you have to actively hold that line. I don't want to get into the whole tactics of it necessarily, but you have to do actual putting out the fire either with water or tools to be able to control the fire on a mowed fire break like this. So these are all things to consider when you're doing that work. Oh, actually, this next picture is them actually doing it. So they lit this, appears to be a head fire. So the wind is coming from the left and going towards the right. So it's creating this kind of big, scary, hot fire that's burning off towards the right. And then it's backing towards their fire break. And you can see the firefighter in the background is squirting a little bit of water and extinguishing that backing fire right there. So this is just slowly backing into the wind. And then they're extinguishing it as it comes up this mode fire break. Alternatively, if you can, install a disc fire break. So this is where you go out with a disking tillage implement, preferably one that turns over the soil, not a vertical disc or a chisel, but an actual like double gang disc, and turn over the soil so that it's creating bare dirt. You're removing the fuel from the equation entirely. And you can actually, this is perfectly acceptable around the edges, and you'll remove all the fuel, and it's just as good as a road or a lake, just because there's nothing there to burn. Just make sure that it is that it's disked to the point where it's at least 50% soil, certainly, if you're gonna do this. And if you're doing it under a program like Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, you can actually do disked fire breaks as part of the practice, as part of the prescribed burning practice. So that's something that people they get questions about sometimes, but it is perfectly acceptable to do that as part of your fire break prep for your prescribed burn. And then also, you could do it in a combination. So in this case, this is again down in Kansas. They have a disc fire break on the left, and then on the right, they've mowed in another 30 feet, and that is basically to lower the intensity of the fire. So they, and you can see again, you can tell by the way the smoke is going that the wind is coming from the right and it's blowing across the fire line to the left. And so they are essentially lighting, the fire is trying to head fire across that disc fire break. And this is very effective because you lower the amount of receptive fuel on the mode side, and then there's literally nothing to burn on the disc fire break side. And it's very, what do I want to say? It's very effective at keeping fire inside the box. So I just want to recap that planning steps. And I know I blew through that part, but that's where we're at. And we're going to I hope we're going to have some good conversation and questions at the end of this. So you want to consider your smoke, where your smoke sensitive areas are, and then plan your prescription to keep the smoke away from those smoke sensitive areas while also accomplishing your ecological goals. Okay. And then once you have your prescription in place, then you can plan your fire breaks accordingly for what you need. We should have, Tabitha, we should have probably had got some maps, like demo maps to run through those scenarios a little bit, but that's all right. So I'm gonna turn it back. I'm gonna unmute you, Tabitha, and then I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you.
Oh,
I figured it out. I got it on my own. Thank you. Yeah, that would be good to include. Good note for the future, but nice job. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about the day of the burn. What are you going to do on the day of the burn? So you've already went through, you've considered smoke, you have your fire break set, and now the nice, perfect day has come within your prescription, because it can be difficult sometimes to find a day where, certain burns, I know landowners need a south wind. In April, that's about, 40% of the time, 50% of the time, we'll get a south wind. So, if you're planning to do it next Saturday, it might not work out next Saturday if you've got a prescription where you need a specific wind direction. So you've done all that. You're on the day of the burn. So I'm going to talk about the first thing you're going to do, which you're going to need to think of ahead of time as well, is notifications. You're going to need to notify some people before you light your fire. There are 3 here to notify. So the first is your local communication center, the non-emergency line. So you're going to want to notify dispatch, the non-emergency line, and let them know that you will be conducting a prescribed burn. You're also going to want to notify your local fire department so that they know that you're lighting the fire that day. And finally, notifying your neighbors is important as well. As Jason talked about before, you might have neighbors with health conditions that would not want to be in smoke, and you're going to need them to know so that they don't all call the fire department the day of or are inconvenienced or possibly risking their health. So those are the three that you're going to need to notify. And it is important that you do so, because if you do not and somebody calls in your fire, the fire department will come and put out that burn regardless of how controlled and well it is going. They will come and put that burn out because it is a wildfire. You did not report it as a prescribed burn. So in their eyes, it is a wildfire and they will need to put out that fire. So those are the three that you need to notify. And notifying your neighbors, you're going to want to notify definitely the adjacent landowners, anybody who's next to the areas that you're going to be burning, but you may need to notify people a little farther out depending on how large the burn is. If it's going to be a 160-acre burn and you're going to have smoke drifting to the north, you may want to notify people for well over a mile to the north so that they don't get really heavy smoke on them. So depending on the size of the burn is kind of going to help you figure out how far around you're going to need to notify. And in our NRCS template of a burn plan, it states to notify the landowners, the adjacent landowners, a month in advance as well as the day of the burn. I'm not sure I know anybody who always does it exactly a month ahead of time. That's pretty ambitious, but you're definitely going to want to let them know at least a couple weeks ahead of time that we're going to be planning to do a burn. You may not know the exact day as you're waiting for your weather conditions to be right. So it's good to just give them a heads up ahead of time. And then that way, when you tell them the day of that you're doing a burn, they're not going to be like, well, my daughter's getting married in the backyard today. So it can prevent some tensions if you do make sure to let them know ahead of time as well. So on to the next step here on our day of the burn. I'm going to talk briefly about the ignition sequence and ring fire. So in this image here, we have a couple crews working on lighting a ring fire. So when you go to, I'm finding it hard to describe this because it's so, just a brief overview, but generally you're going to want to start your fire on the very downwind end of the burn unit. And so as you can see, that would be on this image, the very bottom right-hand corner there. And so you're gonna wanna start with what is called a backing fire. So a backing fire is going to be moving into the wind direction. It's going to be a slower fire that's going to have a more complete burn rather than a fire that's racing across. It's gonna build you a black line along your fire break, along what you already have as a fire break, which in this case it says it is a road at the bottom. So that's a good fire break, but it's gonna burn extra black to make sure nothing moves across that line. And then two crews will communicate and sort of move in unison to close that ring at the top end of the unit that's getting the most wind. And so as those crews move around, they're going to be lighting flanking fires, which are a little more active than backing fires, and they're going to be moving into your unit. And finally, once they close the ring, they will allow a head fire to go across the unit. But before any head fires are lit, you're going to want to make sure that no crews are obviously in the unit, and it's safe to do so because head fires are moving a lot faster than backing fires and they can be more dangerous. So you're going to want to make sure that your crews are communicating before you start lighting head fire, and you're also going to want to make sure that you have enough black built on the opposite end of your unit that you're not going to send a fast moving fire directly against your break that you have built, because that could risk the fire jumping across. So there are benefits to both backing fires and head fires. So those backing fires that move slower, they will kill more of your woody species, as that fire is spending more time on whatever it's on. It can kill your woody species a lot more than a fire that just brushes across in a second. But there are definitely benefits to head fire too. One that I can think of is that they will leave a patchier burn. You might not have every area ignited, which can be good to leave refuge for insects or other critters that are out there to continue on. And just it is, leaving some patchier areas unburned is going to lead to more diversity overall too, as you do a diversity of different management on each area of your fields. So that is the general idea of what a ring fire is and how you would go about ignition on your burn day. Moving on to the post-burn evaluation. So you're following your ignition sequence. Everything might not burn. We have a picture here of a patchier burn, which is completely okay. So you're going to do mop up afterwards. You're going to want to make sure that everything within 20 feet of your unit is no longer smoking and no longer on fire. Hopefully you don't have any big heavy fuels in this area, like downed trees, because those can burn for a long time or take a lot of water to put out. But you're going to want to make sure that the outer edges of your unit are not still smoking. And Jason, maybe you can weigh in here. I always would want to err on the safe side and go a little further into the unit than that and not really leave anything very smoking. How do you feel about that?
Depends on what's smoking, I suppose. So, and what's on the outside. I think 20 foot is pretty all right. I mean, for grass, I mean, most of the time, I suspect that most of the people that are here are going to be working with grass fuels, and so you'll be a little smoking duff, and within 20 feet of the line is pretty good, because the rest of the stuff will just kind of go out. But if it's a big log, I mean, I would drag that in somewhere to burn up, or maybe throw it down in a draw, something like that, because it'll burn much longer. And then if the wind does pick up, it's gonna cast embers out that could potentially get over your line. So like most things, unfortunately, the answer is it depends.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good answer. So it says monitor for 48 hours, which you're definitely going to want to monitor it for a couple days afterwards, especially if there are still things smoking out there. You're going to want to keep an eye on them. As Jason said, throwing embers could not be the greatest. And then not only are you going to check back in the following days, but you're going to want to check back in the following weeks and months and maybe a year out to evaluate what your burn did. So if you remember back, we set a land management goal at the beginning. Maybe it was to promote more diversity. Maybe it was to remove woody species. And you're going to want to go out there and see if you've accomplished what you intended to accomplish. And if you didn't, maybe you're going to need to take some time and think about it and figure out what maybe went wrong, what maybe you could do differently. Timing of burns is very important in what species you're going to affect and what effects you're going to have on the landscape overall. So maybe you want to time your burn differently. Maybe you want to try a different tactic. So it's really important to go back and see if you've accomplished your goals. And one thing I will tell you is to take before and after pictures. I even forgot to tell you this until the very end of this, of me sharing things. I always forget to take before pictures. You always remember with the after, you're like, oh, this looks so different, I'm going to take a picture. Try to remember to take those before pictures, because I think those are often forgot about, and they can be really awesome to look back and see exactly how something used to look, and document what changes you've made, and it can help you evaluate as after your burn. So All right, so I have covered briefly what to do on the day of the burn. This would obviously be if you are burning yourself. Many landowners will hire contractors, have a whole crew out there. So sometimes people might do it a little differently too. But you know, if this is something that you intend to do on your land, and maybe you haven't been on very many burns or you're newer to it, definitely reach out to Jason and I for more detailed information, and we can do a site visit, meet with you on the property, take a look. So I'll turn it over to Jason now. He's going to do a quick summary for you.
I like takeaway messages, so that's what I'm going to do. So when you're thinking about the why are we doing this in the first place? The answer is that fire is a natural part of the communities that we're working with. When we're talking about native plants, native grasslands, prairie, fire was a natural part of that. And all those plants are adapted to fire as a disturbance in that system. So reintroducing fire is vital for the health of prairie grasslands. And with that in mind, then goals are very important. So whether you want more warm season grasses, more wildflowers, if you want to kill trees, those are all acceptable, very good goals that is going to drive how you are going to implement your fire. And that's where the planning comes into play, because the more planning you do, the less work, the more planning you do, and the more work you put in ahead of the burn, the smoother it's going to go and the more successful you are going to be. And the one absolute thing that we want to do is promoting safe and effective, ecologically effective fire on the landscape. And the only way to do that is through proper planning. So sorry, I'm still doing the techno stuff on the side here. But you want to plan for your smoke, plan your prescription. And in retrospect, I apologize because I didn't link the prescription with the ecological goals very much. And I'm very happy that we're ahead of the clock a little bit, because maybe we could talk about that a little bit more, but it's so complex, unfortunately. Anyway, consider your smoke, design your prescription to stack the deck in your favor, and then plan your fire breaks. Choose and plan and build your fire breaks accordingly. And then on the day of the burn, make sure you notify people, certainly the comm center, the communication center, 911, because that is who people are going to call when they see a plume of smoke over by the farm, right? And then they're going to send out the fire department, who very well may put out your fire. As a fire department personnel myself, we have done that before if we did not feel that they were safely conducting them. That's up to the staff, though, I guess, but that's neither here nor there. Make sure that people know. Make sure your neighbors know that you're burning, definitely so that they can close their windows, if nothing else. Part of your burn plan is going to have the ignition plan. So you want to, when you are lighting that fire, you want to make sure that you are lighting it purposefully. Again, going with that safety and ecological effectiveness, you want to make sure that you are lighting a fire that's going to do the work and stay where you want it. Okay, so keep those in mind. And unfortunately, we're not able to get into the individual tactics of how to light the fire, aside from that very broad overview of how we conduct a ring fire. But there's a lot of strategy that goes into that, and you could really delve into that and get good at it with your ignition planning. And then lastly, always look back at where you're walking. So when you do a burn, look back at it and see, make sure that it's out before the end of the day, and monitor it to make sure that it stays out, because fires can come back and then they can get out. Oftentimes that is how the vast majority of our wildfires in Iowa are started, by a controlled burn that was not properly monitored, and then wind picked up in subsequent days and it got out. 90% of the fires that we put out on our fire department started as a controlled burn that got out days after it was completed. So monitor your fires, and then go back and look at the effects of it to see if you accomplished the goals in the first place, and change your plans next time accordingly. You have anything else to add, Tabitha?
No, I think that's great. Thanks for recapping and filling in some of the things I might have left out there. That sounds great. I didn't know that that many of the fires you respond to are starting their origins as prescribed fires. So that's kind of an interesting fact that I learned.
Yep, quite often.
Yeah.
So that's the recap. I would like, if you're fine with it, Tabitha, we're gonna go on to questions. I'd like to hear from the audience. So you can unmute yourselves using the buttons there. You can just if anybody has any questions specifically. Otherwise, I would like to take a little bit of time to talk about a little bit more about the prescriptions for specific ecological goals. This picture might look scary, but this is actually this is a fire I was on. This is very controlled. It's a dirt road that goes up over this hill. It just kind of winds, and we had to wait for the proper prescription later than what we would have liked because the humidity was so low. And so we wanted to wait for it to get up to about 40% relative humidity. And so we ended up having to put off igniting this thing until like 7 o'clock at night. And so this is me taking a picture around 10. It was a 250 acre private lands burn that I went and helped with. Made for a pretty picture. Anyway, that's enough of that. Does anybody have any questions or things that they want us to discuss? All right, hearing none for 6 minutes.
Oh, I think Marty is going to ask a question here, but I think he's on mute still.
I'm gonna back out of this though real quick, and I'm gonna go find something while he's asking his question.
Okay.
When you mow to create a barrier around the edge, is it best to mow in the fall so it comes up green in the spring around the edge?
Tabitha, you want to answer his question?
Yeah, I think a lot of times what I'll suggest is to do both. So mow it in the fall, and haying it is even better. If you can hay it too, you'll have to check your program rules. But getting some of that layer off after you've cut it, mowing in the fall, and then once it starts to green up in the spring, mowing it again, that's going to make it a little more foolproof even. So usually I'll suggest both, but definitely in the fall, you're going to want to mow it, I'd say.
Another question I have, I usually have the fire departments come there. I never know what to pay them.
Oh, yeah.
Is it so much per acre? Is it? It's more
Give us all the money you have. So the answer I give people, I mean, so one thing, ask them to give you an invoice. So a lot of volunteer departments, they just kind of do a handshake agreement with farmers. And so, I know in the small town that I grew up in, the farmers would give them, a few cases of beer, and they'd call it a training day or whatever, right? And there wasn't necessarily any money that changed hands, or if there was, it was a donation. Well, I mean, do give them some money. Like, I guess, anywhere between $30 and $50 an acre would be still cheaper than hiring someone, but very competitive, and it makes it worth their while. When I talk to other fire departments, I tell them that they should charge something, because as a fundraiser, they can flip a hell of a lot of pancakes before they can, get the kind of money that it would take to compete with burning, right, as a fundraiser. So it allows them, giving them money like that allows them to buy equipment that they really need, because a lot of departments are just woefully strapped as far as that goes. So long story short, I would say $30 to $50 an acre is very respectable and would be very, very welcome.
Thank you.
I did want to bring up, so instead of me talking a bunch about timing, and we definitely could, I could probably talk for an hour about timing a burn, but on that ISU website, this is I clicked that link, I copied the address, but if you search for Iowa State prescribed fire, it's going to come up to the forestry department, and they have these guidebooks right here, which are excellent. There's tons of information in there. And one of them is this timing a prescribed burn, which is exceptionally good. And it talks about why you would want to time. We're using the ecology of the stand to accomplish our goals for us. And so that's what a lot of this is talking about. You have your goals in mind, and you can, by timing the burn properly, you can have different effects. And it has this really good table down here. If you want to control invasive species, when to burn, and what kind of conditions to burn in, as well as improving wildlife habitat. So if you want to target specific species, that's how it goes. When not to burn, yes, that is fair game. Generally speaking, a lot of times if you want to increase warm season grasses, you want to burn somewhere in April to mid-May, probably. This, where was that? I don't know, might not have it. This job sheet, oh, this is not it. This is something else. I might not actually be able to come up with it so quickly. No, I'm not going to be able to. But the NRCS job sheet, this one that we had the picture of, we can send you a PDF of this, and it actually has another really good way to time burns in there as well. So just know that by timing burns differently, it's going to have very different effects on your stand. And if you have questions on that, ask a professional, I would say. So Tabitha and I are always happy to answer questions about this kind of stuff. And I see Randy has a question, and you're more than welcome.
Yeah, can you hear me? I've never done this before.
We can hear you.
Okay. Actually, this is Georgia.
I was gonna say, you don't look like a Randy, but I'm not gonna.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Oh, you can see me? I didn't know you could see me. Good, I'm glad. Anyway, we're in the Pheasant Safe program, and so we're having the local fire department. I'm glad to hear what you say about how much to give them per acre. That was good. So they're going to be doing it for us. And my question is, when you were scrolling through some of that information you just had about the wild parsnip, did I see that it comes back worse than once you burn it? Does it come back? What's it say?
It does.
Oh.
Yeah. Some things like fire. Wild parsnip is one of them.
We don't have a lot of it. It's basically coming in from one ditch area, and at one time it's not too bad. In fact, we've gone out and on cloudy days and with good clothing on, and we've kind of tried to uproot some of it. I know it's like a losing battle, but I wondered about that with the fire. So that was a good thing. And that's on the ISU extension. We can see all that information.
Yep, you can get all these PDFs on there.
Okay.
And maybe Tabitha will be nice and send out a link after this is over.
Yeah. I can definitely do that. Not a problem.
I think the only other thing we have is we have some smaller trees, probably like Chinese elm and a few, I don't know, I want to say cottonwood, but maybe not cottonwood, but they have that type of leaf.
Mm-hmm.
But, so they're not real huge yet, but yeah, I saw that wild parsnip go by. Oh, and then the, you mentioned it earlier at the very beginning, the, I call them bull thistles, the great big ones.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of Canadian thistle. Well, not a lot, but we have it.
Yeah, definitely.
How will that go with fire? Will fire kind of take care of some of those?
I'd say it's probably your best management bet. You're not going to want to disc it. Spraying is the other thing that you can do, but fire, from what I've heard and seen, it's kind of a neutral on thistles. It's not really going to kill them, but I haven't seen it make them come back a whole ton either. What do you say, Jason?
Not like the wild parsnip. Okay.
Right. Well, I will say, I will interject. So we had budgeted an hour. So at 7:30, Tabitha and we will continue to talk. So we will not be sad if anybody has to sign off and go on and live the rest of their lives. But yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to sit here and answer questions, especially because my wife is working. So we're having a late supper tonight anyway. But okay, so going with thistles, you can use that. It's true. Like it's neutral. So depending on when you burn, it will have different effects on thistles. But you can use fire to help control the thistles. And so what I will often recommend for stands that have a lot of thistles in them, do an early burn. So we're talking about early May,
Right.
or not early May, early April. So around now, go out and burn it, because that's actually going to invigorate the thistles. Okay. And that might sound bad, that's not what you want. However, the thing that we don't tell the thistles is that, so we're burning it, and so they're all gonna be really invigorated. And then what we don't tell them is that we're going to apply herbicide to them. Okay. So you're gonna go out and you're gonna spot spray those thistles this spring yet, when they're bolting. So that is when they are just going into their reproductive stage, when they're going to form a bud, right?
Mhm.
So that is the time when they have expended the most amount of energy that they're going to make that flower. And then you go in and you spray them with herbicide, something with, I don't remember what the active ingredient is now, but
Aminopyralid?
it might be, yeah, like Milestone, yeah,
Oh, I've heard
or
of Milestone.
like Grazon Next, I think, are two trade names. I mean, you can use whatever herbicide you want, but yeah, Aminopyralid, I think I think you are exactly correct on that one. But you go out and you spray them with your herbicide when they're invigorated and expending all that energy, and you're going to get really good mortality. And then in the fall, you go and you do a follow-up application. So you basically walk out there, do a spot application for any that did not die from that spring application, because that is actually the time to kill Candida thistles in the fall, because when you apply herbicide right around the first hard frost, that's what triggers Candida thistle to go dormant. And so it's going to translocate all that chemical down into the root system when it goes dormant. And
Okay.
you're going to kill them deader than a hammer then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, you can use fire like that to set yourself up for herbicide application.
Right. Well, we're hoping the fire department, we've got them lined up, but of course we're waiting for, and they have to have enough guys and the right, like you say, the right conditions, and hopefully we'll have it done before the nesting. We wanted to get it done early enough for the stuff to start coming back up for nesting season. So
Sure.
Yeah. Well, good.
thanks a lot.
Of course, of course.
Yep.
Thanks for the
Yeah.
question.
Mhm.
Does anybody else have any questions? So Kim asked, what is the rate to fire departments? So you're talking about payment rate? Oh yeah, sorry. She's privately messaging me, but I'm speaking it out loud. I'll message her back. She must not have heard me, or he. Actually, I don't know. Kim Wyman. Not sure if it's a him or her, actually. Sorry, I shouldn't assume those things. It is to remind, I would say, you can charge whatever, or they can charge whatever, I guess, or, that's between you and them. I don't want to get involved in my keyboard's very loud. I'm sorry. Oh, no. Oh, yeah, there we go. So.
Oh, Kim's on now too.
Yeah,
I
there we
noticed
go.
maybe Kim, you had connection issues or something.
Yeah, so I don't want to get involved in between a landowner and the vendor, because that's what the fire department is essentially. But I usually recommend $30 to $50 an acre. So I say that to the fire departments when they ask me what to charge, and when a landowner asks me what to give them, I say $30 to $50, mostly because that is what, for Southwest Iowa, that is kind of the average run-of-the-mill kind of charge. So that's what I say. Yep. Does anybody else have any other questions or
Here's another
queries.
question, being a firefighter, when you see a fire burning and it's white smoke compared to black smoke, what type of smoke do you like seeing when you, especially you want to kill seedlings and things like that? Is it
Well,
hotter
so,
than black?
well, it depends. Yeah, the black would be an indicator that there is some sort of
Moisture.
like a petroleum. So either there's oils in it some kind of way, and so either it's tires that are burning, or oil or something bad, or in natural fuels like cedars. Eastern red cedars will put off black smoke. So will reeds, like thick wetland type stuff, or like Phragmites is a reed grass that really puts off black smoke. So it might just be what is burning and not how the fuel is behaving necessarily. Also, it might be white smoke is actually something that happens when fuels are green. So that it's white because it's water vapor that's burning off. So if you burn late in the season and there's a lot of, for example, smooth brome, and it'll have that really white, wispy, sticky smoke that's really tough to breathe in. That's like if you were to burn late in late May or June maybe, or trying to do summer burns where there's a lot of green material that's burning up, you'll have the smoke will look like that. But really the smoke is more, the color of the smoke is an indicator of what is burning and how hot it's burning. So not necessarily an indicator of effectiveness, if that makes sense. I don't know if that really answered your question, but when
That makes, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tabitha.
I was just going to say that makes sense to me, but I've heard, these are just things I hear, is that black smoke is angry smoke. And then that means that it's more of a head fire or a faster moving fire and you're not getting complete combustion. I'm not sure if this is true or not, to be honest. So but I've heard that whiter smoke is more of a complete burn and that blacker smoke is more of what you'll see in a head fire. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, generally I would agree with that. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Like, because there's also in a head fire, there's the more and the thicker the smoke is, it's because there's more material burning and the fire is moving faster and it is more incomplete. I mean, you are correct on that, but it's not necessarily an indicator of like ecological goals.
That makes sense.
Or effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. There is another question in the chat. Do other agencies do burn plans like the DNR, etc.? Where else can someone get a burn plan done if they're not going through the fire department? So that's a good question. The DNR, their private lands biologist, will also write burn plans for you. So if you don't have a Pheasants Forever biologist in your area, you can go to a DNR private lands biologist. And if you're in one of those counties, there are a few counties across the state of Iowa that don't have a private lands or a Pheasants Forever biologist. And you can always reach out to your sort of area biologists with the DNR. They have different area biologists, or hopefully your local USDA service center could direct you if they don't have a biologist in their area, direct you to someone close by who could do a burn plan for you. So nobody in USDA or NRCS will write burn plans, but Pheasants Forever biologists like myself and Jason can. DNR private lands biologists and technicians can write burn plans for landowners. If you are hiring somebody to do a prescribed fire for you, they should be writing their own burn plan. If that's the fire department, if it is some other business that provides that service, there are a number of those out there. I would say that they should be writing the burn plan themselves because they're going to be the ones conducting the burn. And so they're probably going to want to do it themselves anyways. So, but if you are a landowner doing it on your own, looking for help writing the plan, that is what I would suggest. Us, the DNR, or contacting your local USDA to try to help you connect with us. But we do have maps online of our staff and the DNR staff, private lands biologist maps. Anything to add, Jason?
Nope, I think that's spot on. That's exactly correct.
Good. Any other questions? Good questions.
And if anything, I don't have my contact information on here, but I mean, Tabitha, if you're going to send out a link, if you send this link out, that would be excellent to
I can do
folks.
that.
And then maybe a copy of that, the NRCS job sheet, and then our contact information. I'd be very grateful, because if anybody has any questions on that kind of stuff, I mean, they can, if they're one of your clients, they can contact you, obviously, but people can always contact me as well. I'm always happy to answer questions and talk on the phone. Happy to always do that.
Yeah, of course. I'll send that out with both our contact information and what we talked about. Yeah, that would be great. I will do that.
Okay.
Any
Well,
other last minute questions?
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, I beat you to it. All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I'll just say that I appreciate everybody joining on this evening. I hope you learned a thing or two, got you thinking more about the landscape as we transition into spring. It's always such a fun time as we go to plan our gardens, plan our flowers, plan our, crops, plan our CRP and our wild area management that we might have if we're lucky to do. And so I just want to say thank you so much for joining. It's really good to see some new faces this evening. It's really good to see some of your faces again that I have met in the past, and I'm excited to see you again in the future. And feel free to reach out with any questions.
Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you. Have a good night.